Get up and learn your place. Reese's voice cracked across the sidewalk as his shoe came down on the girl's face, the sickening thud echoing between perfectly trimmed hedges. Someone gasped. Someone else whispered that the board would handle it quietly. And then the boy laughed, as if hurting her was his right, as if nothing could touch him in this neighborhood built on power and fear. Before anyone could decide whether to intervene, a thin red dot slid across his chest, trembling like a warning pulled from the air itself. By the way, where are you watching from? Tell me in the comments below. Most people thought it was a weapon sight. Most people didn't know someone miles away was watching him through a long-range lens, recording everything. And most people had no idea that the quiet man stepping into the chaos, a man wearing a faded maintenance badge, had once lived a life built on precision, threat assessment, and patience. "Move," the worker said, calm in a way that made bystanders step back even before they understood why. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't rush. He simply knelt beside the bleeding girl, as if the world around them hadn't already shifted. He was Elias Vorn, though no one here knew what he used to be, or what he could still become when pushed. They only saw the mild-mannered inspector who fixed sprinkler heads and replaced faulty entry lights. They didn't see the man cataloging angle, force, witnesses, exits, collecting truth in real time. He touched his daughter's cheek softly, feeling the swelling beneath her skin, breathing through the sharp rise of protective fury. She tried to speak, but pain warped her voice. He whispered that she didn't need to talk, that he had her. The disbelief, the shock, the hurt in her eyes cut deeper than the visible injury. She wasn't just attacked. She was humiliated. On the sidewalk of the community he worked to keep functioning. Around them, neighbors hovered, their eyes darting between Reese and the man kneeling in the street. No one approached Elias. No one offered help. Not until someone murmured that Cassandra Miles was already on her way, which snapped a different kind of fear through the crowd. Fear of the woman who controlled more of the HOA's power than anyone should. Elias lifted his daughter gently, cradling her weight with a practiced steadiness that suggested experience none of them recognized. His movements were precise, efficient, careful not to worsen her injuries. The calm in him wasn't emptiness. It was calculation. It was containment. It was the dangerous quiet that forms right before a storm chooses where it will break. Reese stepped back when Elias rose. His bravado faltered. Someone asked if he was okay. Someone else, too loud, said that Lyra had provoked him somehow. Elias didn't respond. He didn't even look at Reese. He only adjusted his hold on his daughter and walked to the car as though noise, accusation, and hierarchy were minor inconveniences compared to her safety. But every detail, every foot placement, every shaky excuse from the crowd, every flicker of guilt on Reese's face, he filed away without letting a single emotion show. He didn't need to confront anyone yet. Not here, not without evidence, and not with Cassandra minutes away from spinning this scene into something else entirely. When he reached the car, he paused. Not because he doubted himself, he never doubted, but because he could feel the shift in the air. Someone unseen was watching, not in a threatening way, but in the way a shadow from the past might settle before revealing itself. He didn't know about the red dot. Not yet. But he sensed the presence behind it, the familiarity of surveillance done by someone who understood angles and timing the way he once did. He placed his daughter carefully in the passenger seat, buckled her in, and whispered that everything would be okay, not as comfort, but as a promise he intended to keep. The quiet man they all underestimated closed the door, stepped around the car, and started the engine with a resolve that felt like a boundary snapping into place. And behind him, the boy who believed he ruled the street still hadn't realized what was coming. The red dot had vanished, but the truth it marked had already begun its slow, unstoppable climb toward daylight. Elias drove through the gates of Silverbrook Bluffs without looking back at the street where everything had changed. The evening air was cooling, but sweat still clung to his palms as he checked on his daughter again. Her breathing was shallow, her head tipped slightly forward, and every time the car hit even the smallest bump, she winced. He slowed the vehicle to nearly a crawl, not caring if anyone behind him grew impatient. Anger wanted to surge, but he pressed it down. Anger wouldn't help her. Anger wouldn't build a case. Anger would only feed the power structure Cassandra relied on to twist every narrative in her favor. Evidence. That was what mattered now. Evidence and patience. He pulled into the urgent care lot and lifted her from the seat with the same steadiness he had used on fields far more dangerous than this suburb. Inside, nurses rushed to help the moment they saw the swelling on her cheek and the blood at her lip. A young nurse asked what happened, but the moment Elias said it happened inside Silverbrook, her posture stiffened. People here always reacted that way. The HOA was known for keeping its problems internal. Outsiders didn't question them, and residents rarely pushed back. But Elias was done being quiet. As they guided his daughter into an exam room, he noticed another nurse glance at him with recognition. Not of his job, but of something else, something deeper. She didn't say anything, but her eyes lingered long enough that he knew she sensed the discipline in the way he moved, the controlled tension in his shoulders. It didn't matter. What mattered was making sure his daughter received proper care and ensuring every photograph, every note, every medical detail was documented. When the doctor confirmed facial trauma and ordered imaging to check for fractures, Elias requested copies of every image. The doctor didn't argue. This wasn't a man you argued with. He looked too composed, too certain, too practiced at carrying pain without flinching. Once his daughter was settled, Elias stepped into the hall and called the police. He gave them a factual description. No emotion, no embellishment. He learned long ago that the truth spoken plainly carried more force than any anger ever could. The officer said they would review internal HOA reporting before deciding next steps. Elias knew exactly what that meant. Cassandra's version would be heard first. As he hung up, his jaw tightened. Victory wouldn't come through emotion. It would come through exposure. He left a nurse to watch over his daughter and drove back towards Silverbrook. He didn't return home. He went straight to the maintenance access corridor behind the HOA administrative office. Residents rarely walked back here. It was mostly for vehicles, equipment, and the people who made the neighborhood function without acknowledgement. He scanned his badge and slipped inside. The building was quiet. Too quiet. Cassandra's influence stretched far enough that employees avoided tension rather than risk upsetting her. Elias moved through the service hall, mind already assembling the steps of what had to happen next. He needed the raw camera feeds. He needed timestamps. He needed metadata. Cassandra would try to bury everything, but she didn't understand how the digital systems here actually worked. She didn't know that maintenance-level backups existed on entirely separate servers. She didn't know that every attempt to delete footage left a footprint. He did. At the end of the hall, he reached the security terminal. The screen glowed faintly in the dim room. He typed his credentials, and the system opened without hesitation. He navigated through layers of files, noticing several restricted access tags that hadn't existed that morning. Cassandra had already acted. She was fast. She wasn't foolish, just confident in the shield her status provided. But the footage she restricted wasn't truly gone. It simply meant she didn't want others viewing it. Maintenance logs, however, recorded file movements. Elias opened them and saw exactly what he expected. Several clips flagged, transferred, and hidden under a folder labeled Safety Concerns. He saved copies to an encrypted drive he carried out of habit, a relic from his former life. Footsteps echoed faintly down the hall. He paused, letting the sound settle. It wasn't fear that stopped him. It was instinct. The rhythm wasn't hurried, not hostile, someone leaving late. He remained still until the sound faded, then continued his work. He pulled the raw timestamp logs next. These were crucial, proof of manipulation. He noted each adjustment Cassandra made, each discrepancy, each missing second. The digital trail told a story she didn't expect anyone to follow. When he finished, he shut the system down and stepped outside into the cooling night. Across the street, a car engine hummed low. The headlights remained off. Elias couldn't see the driver, but something in his chest tightened. Not fear, but a pull of memory. Old familiarity. He didn't approach, not yet. There would be time for that. He returned to his car and finally allowed himself to exhale. His daughter needed him. Evidence needed organizing. And Cassandra had just begun a fight she didn't understand. In her world, the loudest version of the truth always won. In his world, only the most verifiable one did. He started the engine quietly. Tomorrow, the exposure would begin. The engine's low hum settled into the quiet night as Elias pulled away from the maintenance corridor. Every street lamp in Silverbrook cast orderly pools of light, clean and symmetrical, as if the entire neighborhood existed just to prove how controlled it was. But he knew better. Control here was a performance, and Cassandra was its loudest performer. He reached home, helped his daughter inside with steady hands, and waited until she drifted into medicated sleep before stepping onto the small back porch. The night whispered around him, still, cautious, thoughtful. He wasn't surprised when he sensed movement beyond the hedge line. Not noise, just presence. Years of training didn't fade. They settled deep. He didn't call out. Whoever was out there wasn't moving like a threat. No jitter, no weight imbalance, no pattern of someone hunting. This was someone observing, watching the house the way he had once watched targets in the field. He closed the door quietly and let the curtains fall. The unseen car from earlier lingered in his mind, but he didn't chase assumptions. Cassandra had no reason to send anyone, not yet. Her power rested on image, not intimidation. No, this felt different, familiar in ways he couldn't place yet. At dawn, he was already awake, sorting through last night's files. His daughter slept in the next room, her breathing soft but strained. Every document he compiled mattered more because of that sound. Her pain was the clock ticking down on Cassandra's fabricated story. He opened the metadata logs again, overlaying timestamps from the street cameras with the server activity Cassandra tried to hide. Her pattern was sloppy, deleting frames, shifting clips, renaming files. She assumed no one below her would question anything. She assumed wrong. By mid-morning, residents began filling his inbox with forwarded messages. Cassandra's official HOA statement. It claimed Reese acted in fear, that Lyra lunged at him, that the incident was unfortunate but understandable. A line at the bottom announced a mandatory community safety meeting scheduled in 2 days. A meeting. Perfect. Exposure thrived in public. He read the statement twice, not to understand it. He understood lies the first time, but to assess the strategy behind it. Cassandra's script was predictable. Control the story early, overwhelm the truth with curated outrage, frame Elias as an overreactive parent, and Reese as a misunderstood teenager under stress. Typical power play. He didn't reply to anyone. His silence would be misinterpreted as weakness, but silence wasn't surrender. Silence was preparation. Before he could return to the logs, his phone buzzed with a number he hadn't seen in years. He froze, not with fear, but with the sensation of a past life brushing against the edges of the present. The call ended before he could answer. A single text followed. "I'm nearby. We need to talk." No name. But he knew the rhythm in the words, the clipped certainty. Orrin. A part of him tightened instinctively. Orrin Hale had vanished from his world years ago without explanation, swallowed by his own ghosts. The man had been a mentor, a shadow, a guardian force of nature who taught him precision and discipline long before Elias joined Recon. Orrin didn't appear unless something mattered, deeply. Elias put the phone down slowly. He didn't have time for reunions, but the thought of that red dot appearing in the moment of the assault, the detail he still hadn't explained to himself, pushed the question forward. Was it him? He left the house quietly, locking the door with a soft click, and walked toward the perimeter trail behind his yard. The sun was sharp, cutting through branches in thin beams. He followed the subtle impressions on the ground, footprints that moved with intention, not curiosity. They led toward the old utility shed near the creek. When he reached it, the door was slightly ajar. Inside, dust floated where a beam of sunlight cut across the space. A folding stool was set against the wall, a thermos tucked beside it. And on the stool sat a small device. A long-range rangefinder with a calibration laser. Not a weapon, not a threat, but a perfect tool for capturing distance, detail, angle. The very tool that could paint a red dot across Reese's chest. Elias exhaled slowly. So it was him. He didn't touch the device. Instead, he stepped back and scanned the area. A single mint wrapper lay crumpled near the shed's edge, Orrin's habit. Same brand he used during sniper Overwatch training. A small indulgence he claimed helped him focus. Elias pocketed the wrapper and left without looking back. Evidence was building, piece by piece. Back home, he found another email in his inbox, this one from the HOA president, Miles Rennick. He rarely contacted Elias directly. Cassandra informed us, "You're creating unnecessary tension. Please refrain from escalating matters until the meeting." Elias read it twice. The phrase unnecessary tension burned. His daughters shattered. Face was tension to them. Not an assault, not a crime, just tension. He didn't respond. He didn't need to. The meeting would speak for him. As evening settled, he returned to his files, assembling the digital timeline with meticulous precision. Cassandra's manipulation was undeniable. Every deletion, every edited clip, every mislabeled file. He charted them into a sequence that told the truth far louder than he ever could with words. The exposure had begun, quietly and steadily. Soon, every resident who believed in Cassandra's perfect community would see what she had tried to hide. And when they did, the weight of their silence would break. Elias worked late into the night, the glow of the monitor carving sharp angles across his face as he refined the digital timeline. Every clip Cassandra altered had its original fingerprint embedded beneath her edits. She didn't understand that metadata was truth carved into code. You could smear the surface, but the bones of the footage never lied, and Elias knew exactly where to look. By the time the house grew completely quiet, he had reconstructed enough of the missing segments to challenge everything Cassandra claimed, not in a heated argument, not in some emotional confrontation, in plain, irrefutable evidence. His daughter stirred once, wincing as pain rippled across her cheek. He stepped away from the desk, adjusted her pillow, and whispered that he was here. He always was. She drifted back into sleep, breathing slowly. For a moment, all the years of trying to build a peaceful life pressed down on him. He'd wanted so badly to leave the past behind. But now the past, the skills, the instincts, the precision, was exactly what he needed. When he returned to the table, his phone vibrated with another message from an unknown number. Same place tomorrow. Bring nothing. He knew it was Oren. The wording was unmistakable, efficient, sparse, signaling gravity without theatrics. But Elias spent the rest of the night debating whether he should respond. He chose not to. Oren didn't require confirmation. If Elias showed up, he showed up. If he didn't, Oren would still watch from a distance. That was how he had always been. At sunrise, Elias brewed coffee and reviewed the security server's internal logs again. Before leaving the house, he backed up the entire reconstructed timeline onto 3 separate encrypted drives. He kept one in his pocket, hid another under a loose floorboard, and placed the third inside his car's fuse box. Redundancy was survival, both in war zones and in neighborhoods controlled by people who believed they were untouchable. Around mid-morning, he received an email from the HOA administrative assistant. Cassandra had requested an emergency narrative correction for the neighborhood newsletter. She planned to distribute a longer explanation, full of carefully constructed language, to protect Reese's reputation. The assistant included an apologetic note, beneath it saying she had no authority to push back. Elias didn't blame her. Cassandra built her influence by turning resistance into liability. Anyone who contradicted her became a target. Complaints about yard maintenance, parking violations, even late fees appeared mysteriously on their accounts. The neighborhood lived under soft intimidation. Elias had observed it for years, but now Cassandra had overplayed her hand. He stepped outside as the sun climbed higher, locking the door gently behind him. His daughter was resting. The house was quiet. He headed down the trail behind the property, moving without hurry. Even after years of absence, muscle memory carried him along the terrain with silent familiarity. Weight evenly distributed, footfalls softened, eyes tracking movement effortlessly. At the creek's bend, he found him. Oren sat on a fallen log, posture straight, eyes scanning the trees even while his hands rested loosely on his knees. He hadn't changed much, lean, watchful, anchored by a discipline that felt too deep to unlearn. His hair was grayer, but the alertness in his eyes was the same. "You took long enough," Oren said without turning. "I had work." Elias stopped a few feet away. Distance was a habit neither broke easily. Oren nodded toward the shed. "You saw the device?" "Yes." "Then you know I was there." "I figured," Elias said. "You don't leave mint wrappers behind unless you want to be found." A small twitch passed across Oren's mouth, almost a smile. "I didn't intervene at the moment," Oren said quietly. "Didn't need to. Someone had to record it clean, someone who wasn't involved. You followed me? Elias asked. Checked on you, Oren corrected. Didn't know you had a daughter? Elias didn't respond. The ache behind the words sat too heavy to acknowledge. Oren continued. That boy, he didn't think anyone would see him. He didn't think he'd ever be accountable. You know the type. I do, Elias said. Oren reached into his jacket and pulled out a small encrypted data card. Footage from the entire angle, time-stamped, stabilized, clearer than anything your HOA cameras captured. Elias took it without hesitation. The weight of it felt heavier than its size. Proof, clarity, leverage. This isn't your fight, Elias said softly. Oren looked at him with something between sternness and regret. You're still thinking small. It's not about the fight. It's about the girl and the truth. Elias pocketed the card. I don't want escalation. You're not escalating, Oren replied. You're revealing. They stood in silence, the breeze moving through leaves above them. Elias finally asked, Will you stay? Oren shook his head. I'll be around, but this is yours now. You know what to do. And Elias did. As he walked back to the house, the world felt sharper. The evidence he carried wasn't just enough to dismantle Cassandra's lies. It was enough to topple the foundation she used to isolate and intimidate the entire neighborhood. The path forward was clear. At the meeting in 2 days, Cassandra expected compliance. She would receive exposure instead. Elias returned home from the creek with the data card tucked securely in his jacket, the weight of it feeling strangely stabilizing, like a tool he hadn't known he needed until it was in his hands. He stepped inside quietly, checking first on his daughter. She was still asleep, her breath soft but uneven, her face swollen along the cheekbone. Rage flickered within him, but he kept it contained. Containment wasn't suppression, it was strategy. And he needed strategy now more than ever. He sat at his dining table, powered on the encrypted laptop he rarely used, and inserted Oren's data card. The folder opened instantly. Clean architecture, neatly labeled files, multiple angles from the long-range optic. Oren had always been meticulous. Elias clicked through the clips, each one revealing the sidewalk from a perfect vantage point. Reese pacing, shouting, advancing, Lyra stepping back, falling, the stomp, the scattered reactions of neighbors, Cassandra's arrival and her rapid attempts to control the scene. It was clearer than anything the HOA cameras produced, crisp, steady, undeniable. He leaned back in his chair, processing each segment not just for emotion, but for sequence. How best to present it, how to align it with the manipulated HOA footage, how to reveal Cassandra's alterations in a way no one could dispute. It wasn't enough to be right. He needed to be irrefutably right. Power crumbled only when truth left it nowhere to stand. His phone buzzed. Another email from Cassandra. This one more aggressive. We expect your cooperation at the meeting. Any further disturbance could be considered a violation. Violation. The irony nearly made him laugh. The woman who manipulated evidence felt bold enough to warn him. He closed the message without replying. She wasn't speaking to him. She was speaking to the version of him she assumed existed. The quiet maintenance man who would fold under pressure. She had no idea who she was actually dealing with. He returned to the footage. One clip caught his attention. A neighbor stepping forward but then stopping abruptly when Cassandra arrived. Fear, hesitation, submission, all captured in a single instinctive step back. Elias noted her face carefully. She might become an unexpected ally later, or at least a silent confirmation. By midday, Elias had assembled a master folder containing original HOA footage, timestamps of Cassandra's edits, and Oren's long-range recordings. The structure was precise, designed to guide anyone watching through the truth in chronological clarity. He saved multiple encrypted copies again, placing one inside the hollow frame of a picture in the living room. An old habit from deployment. Yet I ceased protect the essentials by hiding them in plain sight. After ensuring everything was duplicated, he stepped outside to breathe. The neighborhood was in its usual midday rhythm, quiet, polished, obedient. Sprinklers hissed across lawns, gardeners trimmed hedges, and residents walked with the kind of ease that came from believing they were protected by structure and status. But beneath that calm, tension pulsed. A few neighbors glanced at him and then looked away quickly, the fallout from Cassandra's narrative already spreading. He walked toward the maintenance building, not because he needed anything immediately, but because familiarity steadied him. The smell of tools, oil, and metal grounded him in ways nothing else did. When he opened the back door, Ken, the junior maintenance tech, looked up from a workbench. "You all right, Eli?" Ken asked, softer than usual. Elias studied him briefly. Ken was young, but observant. He held a wrench loosely, eyes flicking toward the bruise on Elias's knuckles. "Long night?" Elias replied. Ken hesitated, then said, "People are talking. Cassandra's saying things that don't sound right. I saw the bruise on your girl. If you need anything, just say it." Elias didn't expect loyalty from anyone here, not after how many residents stayed silent. But Ken's offer wasn't loyalty, it was conscience. And conscience mattered. "I'll handle it," Elias said gently, "but I appreciate you asking." Ken nodded, relief crossing his face before he returned to his repairs. Elias stepped into the server alcove again. He didn't need more footage, but he did need to confirm something. Whether Cassandra's edits had triggered any system alerts. She likely didn't know that the HOA system auto-generated silent warnings to maintenance whenever file integrity was violated. The console lit up with several flag notifications. There it was, the digital evidence of her manipulation. Each alert included specifics: unauthorized access attempts, failed deletion logs, overwritten metadata. Perfect. These would further strengthen his case at the meeting. As he downloaded the alerts, a shadow crossed the glass window of the maintenance door. Elias froze, not alarmed, just attentive. Movement was deliberate, slow. When he stepped outside, he saw a figure turning the corner, Cassandra. She wasn't expecting to see him. Her surprise flickered into irritation. "Oh, you," she said, adjusting her expression into something resembling concern. "How's your daughter? I hope she's calming down." Elias didn't correct her. He didn't need to. "She's injured," he replied simply. "Well, I'm sure the truth will sort itself out." Cassandra smiled tightly. "Just remember, this community values harmony." Harmony. The word tasted like a threat wrapped in silk. Elias nodded once, said nothing, and watched her leave. Her confidence told him one thing clearly. She still believed. She held every card. Good. The more certain she felt, the harder the fall would strike. He returned home with the last pieces of digital proof stored carefully on his drive. His daughter stirred awake as he stepped into the house. He sat beside her, brushing a hand over her hair. She whispered, "Dad, what's going to happen?" He answered with the only truth he trusted. "We're going to show them exactly what happened. And in 2 days, the entire community would see it, whether they wanted to or not." Elias stayed beside his daughter until her breathing eased again, the tension in her shoulders slowly melting as the medication settled in. Only once she drifted back into a deeper sleep did he rise from the bedside. The house felt different now, its quiet no longer gentle but charged, like air before a storm. Everything he had gathered so far, the footage, the alerts, Oren's recordings, formed a growing weight behind him, pushing him toward what had to come next. Truth wasn't passive, it demanded momentum. He moved to the table and opened his laptop again. The files were already organized, but now he needed to merge them in a way that dismantled Cassandra's narrative cleanly and precisely. His approach had to be unshakable. No embellishments, no emotion, just truth laid out in a sequence even she couldn't wiggle around. As he aligned timestamps, something struck him. The pattern of Cassandra's deletions matched the exact windows where Oren's recordings showed her manipulating the scene. She had tracked her son's actions, assessed the threat to her family's image, and then carved out digital space to rewrite the story. She didn't care about accountability, not for her son, not for the victim. Her priority was control. Elias saved the combined footage and pushed back from the table, the chair creaking under the shift of weight. That was when the knock came. 3 taps, soft but deliberate. Not a neighbor, not law enforcement. Someone who didn't want to alarm but wanted to be acknowledged. He opened the door slowly. Oren stood there, hands in his jacket pockets. Posture relaxed, but eyes scanning the room instinctively. He didn't ask to enter. He didn't have to. Elias stepped aside. Oren walked in and glanced toward the hallway where the girl slept. "She holding up?" She's in pain, Elias said quietly. But she's strong. She gets that from somewhere. The brief silence between them was thick, threaded with years of history neither had addressed. It wasn't hostility, just distance carved by time. I saw Cassandra leaving the maintenance building earlier, Oren said. She looked smug. Elias nodded. She thinks she's already sealed the narrative. Then she's never faced someone who knows how to build a timeline. The corner of Elias's mouth lifted a fraction. Or someone who knows how to dismantle hers? Oren approached the table, eyes scanning the clips Elias had paused on. You layered them, he noted. Good. Let the truth speak in sequence. That's the plan. Oren tapped a knuckle lightly on the screen. You should know, people like her don't fold quietly. Once she realizes the evidence is irrefutable, she'll try to pivot, maybe blame someone else, maybe spin it as misunderstanding. She'll reach for any foothold. And we'll remove them all, Elias said. Oren nodded in approval. You ever think you'd be back in this kind of game? Elias looked toward his daughter's room. I wouldn't be, if not for her. Oren's expression softened for a moment. Then that's all the reason you need. Elias exhaled slowly. The air felt clearer. Oren stepped back toward the door, but paused. There's one more thing. He pulled out another small device, a tiny microphone recorder. Had it running the whole time Cassandra was coaching her son. Picks up her voice pretty clearly. Elias took it carefully. Another piece of truth, another crack in Cassandra's armor. I appreciate it, he said. You don't owe me anything, Oren replied. Just finish this clean. He left as quietly as he arrived, fading into the night with the kind of silence only decades of training could create. Elias closed the door and stared at the recorder in his hand. He played a section. Cassandra's voice came through sharply. Say she struck first. Say she came at you. Don't waver. I'll handle the rest. Cold, controlled, calculated. He felt a steady flame kindle inside him. Not rage, but clarity. The meeting wasn't just an opportunity. It was the battleground Cassandra had unknowingly chosen, and he would use her own structure, her own rules, her own demand for community harmony to expose her completely. By late afternoon, the sun dipped low, casting long shadows across the floor as Elias compiled everything into a final presentation file. He tested every clip, checked every timestamp, ensured every detail flowed without gaps. By the end, he knew it by memory. He stood and stretched, walking to the window. A pair of residents walked down the street, whispering, glancing toward his house. They weren't hostile. They were uncertain, caught between rumor and truth. Cassandra's reach had shaped their understanding, but the ground beneath that narrative was already weakening. He turned away from the window and checked the drives again. 3 backups, all intact, all ready. His daughter stirred and called softly. He returned to her bedside, brushing hair away from her face. She whispered, Did I do something wrong? His heart clenched. No, Elias murmured. You told the truth, and now it's time everyone else sees it. She nodded faintly, trusting him completely. That trust anchored him more deeply than any mission ever had. When she drifted back to sleep, Elias stepped outside to breathe the cooling evening air. The neighborhood was still, controlled, perfect on the surface. But tomorrow, that surface would crack. Tomorrow, Cassandra's polished world would meet something stronger than power. It would meet proof. The evening settled into a heavy quiet as Elias stood on the porch, the air dense with the weight of what tomorrow would bring. The sky above Silverbrook Bluffs looked deceptively peaceful, soft clouds drifting, porch lights flickering on, one by one, the neighborhood easing into its nightly performance of serenity. But beneath that surface was a tension so sharp he could feel it vibrating in his bones. Cassandra believed she controlled the story. Tomorrow, she would learn she had never controlled the truth. He stepped back inside, locking the door behind him. His daughter shifted on the couch, waking slowly. Her face looked slightly less swollen, but the bruise had deepened into dark, angry colors. When she tried to sit up, he helped her carefully, adjusting pillows so the pressure didn't worsen the injury. Dad, do I have to go to school tomorrow? She murmured. Not for a while, he said softly. You focus on healing. I'll take care of everything else. She nodded, her eyes drifting toward the window, as if she feared the outside world might push its way in. He placed a reassuring hand over hers, anchoring her. She relaxed slightly, enough for exhaustion to pull her back down. When she slept again, Elias returned to the dining table and spread out the printed timeline of events. He reviewed every segment, every timestamp. The HOA meeting was less than 24 hours away, and Cassandra would use tonight to reinforce her narrative. He needed to anticipate her every angle. Her strategy would be simple: portray herself as the keeper of order, Elias as unstable, and the assault as mutual fault. People like her didn't defend the truth, they defended their image, and they did it loudly. But she underestimated subtlety. She underestimated precision. She underestimated him. He gathered the drives and slid them into an inner jacket pocket, then tucked the printed timeline into a thin binder. The evidence would speak clearly. All he needed was the right environment to release it. A soft knock startled him, not urgent, not timid. Something in between. He opened the door to find Ken standing awkwardly on the porch, hands shoved into his pockets, eyes darting like he had crossed a boundary simply by showing up. "Sorry," Ken said quickly. "I know it's late. I just couldn't shake something." Elias stepped aside, letting him in with a small nod. Ken walked to the table, glancing at the organized sheets. "I wanted to tell you," Ken began. "Cassandra asked me earlier if I'd noticed you taking anything from the servers. Said she needed to know for security purposes. But it didn't sound like that. It sounded like she's nervous." Elias kept his expression neutral, though inside something tightened. Cassandra was already probing. "Did you say anything?" he asked. "No, I told her the log showed nothing out of the ordinary." Ken hesitated. "Which wasn't a lie, exactly. Your work doesn't show up on the admin logs." But she asked again, twice. Of course she did. Cassandra understood influence, not infrastructure. She didn't know the difference between access-level logs and maintenance-level backups. That ignorance was the crack Elias needed. "She's trying to see how much control she still has," Elias said quietly. "Tomorrow, she'll find out." Ken swallowed. "I'll be there, at the meeting, just in case that matters." It did. A silent ally was still an ally. "Thank you," Elias said. Ken nodded and left, relief palpable as he stepped into the night. Elias watched him disappear down the walkway before closing the door again. He returned to his chair, but instead of sitting, he stood behind it, gripping the backrest as he considered the new layer of risk. Cassandra was already pressing the edges. He needed absolute control of tomorrow's reveal, which meant more preparation. He opened his laptop again and ran a final integrity check on the files. Everything synced, everything clean. No corruption, no missing frames, no gaps she could exploit. Then he opened a folder he hadn't touched in years, old tactical assessment templates from his recon days. Tomorrow's environment wasn't a battlefield, but the principles were the same. Understand the space, anticipate reactions, identify vulnerabilities. He mapped the HOA event hall in his mind. Front podium, Cassandra's control zone. Audience rows, pressure zone, unpredictable. Projector wall, his strike point. Emergency exits, potential disruption routes. All predictable, all manageable. His daughter stirred again, and he stepped away to check on her. She blinked up at him, half awake. "Are you scared?" she asked. He sat beside her and brushed her hair back gently. "No," he said truthfully. "I've been in difficult situations before. This one is clear." "What if they don't believe you?" His jaw clenched, but his voice stayed steady. "They won't have to believe me. They'll see it." She absorbed that, then nodded faintly. "Okay." He kissed her forehead and tucked the blanket closer around her. When she closed her eyes again, he stood slowly, feeling the shift inside himself. The hesitation of the last few days evaporated. What remained was focus. Outside, a car engine rumbled faintly. Oren's watchful presence lingering somewhere beyond sight. It didn't worry him. It reassured him. Not because he needed backup, but because truth gathered strength when witnessed. He turned off the lights, leaving only the glow of the hallway lamp. Tomorrow, Cassandra would enter that meeting expecting applause, validation, the reinforcement of her empire of compliance. Instead, she would face evidence layered with precision. She would face every lie she crafted. She would face the quiet man she thought she'd cornered, and she would fall. Morning arrived with the kind of stillness that didn't belong to Silverbrook Bluffs. Even the usual routines, the hum of leaf blowers, the soft thump of joggers' shoes on pavement, the distant bark of a restless dog, felt muted, as if the neighborhood were holding its breath. Elias stood in the doorway of his home, jacket zipped, binder tucked under one arm, and drives secured in the inner pocket where nothing short of force would remove them. Today was the meeting. Today, Cassandra's carefully curated facade would face the one thing she couldn't manipulate: aligned, undeniable truth. His daughter watched from the couch, wrapped in a blanket, her eyes still bruised but clearer. "Will you come straight back?" she asked, holding his gaze with quiet worry. "Immediately," he promised. "And Ken will check in every hour, Oren too." She nodded once, trusting him without hesitation. That trust steadied him. He stepped outside and locked the door behind him, breathing in the crisp morning air. The walk to the HOA event hall wasn't long, but each step felt deliberate, shaped by purpose rather than nerves. He wasn't anxious. He wasn't preparing to argue. He was preparing to present. As he reached the main boulevard, he noticed parked cars lining both sides of the street. More residents than usual were attending. Good. Public exposure required witnesses. He turned the last corner and saw the hall ahead. Bright white banners, clean glass, trimmed hedges. A symbol of authority. But symbols didn't intimidate him. Truth had its own weight. Inside, the hall buzzed with low conversations. Residents sat in orderly rows, most of them holding printed copies of Cassandra's latest statement. Her tone, community harmony, misunderstandings, protecting our youth, echoed off the pages. She had doubled down, convinced her narrative would dominate. Elias walked down the aisle, heads turned, some eyes softened, others flickered with discomfort. A few narrowed in suspicion, parroting Cassandra's implication that he was agitating circumstances. He didn't react. Their opinions would shift soon enough. At the front, Cassandra stood beside the podium, speaking quietly with Miles Rennick, the HOA president. Her posture was upright, poised, rehearsed, performative grace hiding the strain beneath. When she noticed Elias approaching, her smile cooled. "Mr. Vorn," she said, voice dripping with well-practiced sympathy, "we're so glad you chose to attend. We hope today brings clarity and calm." Elias stared at her evenly. "It will." Her smile slipped for a fraction of a second before she corrected it. "Please wait until your designated time to speak." He nodded once and took a seat in the second row, close enough for the projector to cast the truth clearly across the room. A few seats down, Ken lifted a hand in quiet acknowledgement. Oren wasn't visible, but Elias knew better than to assume he wasn't there. Watching, recording, waiting, Oren moved like the shadow of a conscience. The meeting began. Miles Rennick stepped to the podium and tapped the microphone. "Good morning, everyone. We're gathered here to address the unfortunate incident involving one of our residents. It's important that we approach this with unity and calm." A murmur of agreement passed through the room. Cassandra stepped forward, motioning to the projector. "Before we move into discussion, I'd like to share a few points to ensure everyone understands the broader context." She launched into her polished speech, weaving a narrative of fear, misunderstanding, and community values. She described Reese as a frightened teen, all but painting him as the victim. She portrayed Elias as upset, as if grief had distorted his recollection. Her words were smooth, persuasive, manipulative. Elias listened without flinching. When she finished, she turned toward him with a magnanimous gesture. "Mr. Vorn has requested to speak. We believe in fairness, so he'll have the opportunity to express his concerns." He stood, binder in hand, and walked toward the podium. His footsteps echoed, a single sound in an increasingly silent hall. "Thank you," he said simply, and connected his drive to the projector. The first clip appeared, Lyra walking home, relaxed, unaware. Then Reese emerged, aggressive, agitated, approaching her. Several residents leaned forward, brows furrowing. This wasn't what Cassandra described. The clip continued, Reese shouting, Lyra stumbling. The stomp, captured clearly, brutally. Gasps filled the room. Cassandra's composure faltered. Elias spoke evenly. "This is the raw footage from the HOA maintenance server. Not the admin server, not the version circulated in board channels, the original. He switched to the metadata screen. Here are the timestamps showing when these files were altered. He tapped the mouse. The next window showed Cassandra's admin login. And here is who altered them. Chaos rustled through the room. Cassandra stepped forward, face flushing. This is misleading. Elias clicked again. Oren's footage filled the screen, a perfect, steady recording of everything Cassandra tried to erase. Reese pacing, Lyra falling, Cassandra coaching. And finally, the red dot drifting across Reese's chest, triggering visible fear. This, Elias said, was captured by an outside witness. The laser you see is not a weapon. It's a calibration point from a rangefinder. But Reese didn't know that, nor did Cassandra. Cassandra's mouth opened, but no sound came out. Every eye in the room was on him, on the truth, not the performance. He closed the binder. My daughter didn't attack anyone. She didn't provoke anyone. She was assaulted, and the evidence proving it was intentionally hidden. The silence that followed was heavy, damning, absolute. And in that silence, Cassandra's influence finally cracked. For a moment after the final clip faded from the projector screen, the room felt suspended, frozen between shock and dawning recognition. No one spoke, no one moved. Even the air seemed to tighten around the truth, now hanging in plain sight. Cassandra stood rigid beside the podium, her fingers curled around the edges of her statement papers, as if holding them tighter might somehow preserve their power. But the paper, like her narrative, had already begun to crumble. Miles Rennick cleared his throat, faltering. This is highly irregular." "No," a resident said sharply from the second row. "What's irregular is a child being stomped on and the footage being hidden." Murmurs of agreement rippled outward. Another voice added, "You said the girl instigated it. You told us she was aggressive." Cassandra's expression tightened. "Because that's what I was told. The footage is being presented out of context." Elias clicked again. The audio recording began to play. Cassandra telling her son exactly what to say, instructing him to blame Lyra, promising to handle the rest. Every head pivoted toward her, her face drained of color, then flushed with anger. "This is an invasion. How dare you use illegal recordings?" "It was recorded in a public space," Elias said calmly. "No expectation of privacy. And you weren't exactly whispering." The room erupted with whispers, accusations, disbelief, disgust. Cassandra tried to speak again, but her voice cracked. "My only intention was to protect this community." Ken stood from the back row. Protect it from what? The truth? Cassandra spun toward him, but he didn't back down. Neither did anyone else. The room's energy had shifted completely. The authority she wielded through intimidation evaporated now that the structure she used to maintain control had been dismantled in full view. Miles finally tried to regain order. "Everyone, please, let's keep calm." But calm had already changed its shape. It was no longer the stillness of fear, but the steadiness that followed revelation. One resident, a woman who lived near the assault site, rose slowly. "I saw Reese hit her," she said. "I tried to step in, but Cassandra arrived and told me not to fuel drama. She said it was already taken care of." Elias watched quietly. He didn't interject. His voice had already done what it needed to do. The truth was moving now, resident to resident, witness to witness, like water seeping through cracks. Another resident stood. "I got the newsletter yesterday. You made it sound like the maintenance man was overreacting. You downplayed everything." "I acted with the information available to me," Cassandra snapped, grasping at the last shreds of control. "No," someone else said. "You acted with the version. You created." Reese, who had slumped into his seat during the footage, now looked frightened, hands shaking, eyes fixed on the floor. The bravado he flaunted on the sidewalk was gone. His world of entitlement had collided with consequence. Elias finally spoke again, his voice level, directed toward Miles, not Cassandra. "I'm not here to damage the community. I'm here to protect my daughter. And unless this board addresses what happened, with transparency, none of us can trust the system meant to keep us safe." Miles rubbed his forehead, overwhelmed by the weight settling onto his shoulders. "Mr. Vorn, I see now that the board was misled. This requires immediate review. Effective today, we will suspend Cassandra from all responsibilities pending investigation." The room reacted with collective exhale, Astonishment, relief, vindication. Cassandra's eyes widened in disbelief. You can't suspend me. I built this structure. I am this community. No, Miles said quietly. This community is these residents, and you betrayed their trust. Her composure fractured. She stepped toward Elias, but the room seemed to close ranks around him, neighbors rising subtly, creating space between them. Her voice thinned with desperation. You brought outside surveillance into our neighborhood. You corrupted our servers. You plotted against me. Elias didn't flinch. The only thing I brought was the truth. Her breathing grew shallow, then sharp. For the first time, she looked genuinely shaken, not by Elias, but by the realization she no longer held the room. Her eyes darted around, searching for an ally. No one stepped forward. Finally, Miles called for a brief recess. Residents rose, talking rapidly among themselves, fragmented conversations filling the hall as the projector went dark. Elias stepped aside, giving people space to process. Ken approached him, adrenaline still buzzing in his expression. You did it, Ken whispered. You actually flipped the room. Truth did, Elias replied. Ken shook his head. Still, you were steady up there. Most people would have snapped. I don't snap, Elias said simply. Nearby, a small group of residents approached cautiously. One woman hesitated before speaking. Mr. Vorn, we're so sorry. We didn't know. Elias nodded once. Now you do. Oren appeared then, silent as always, emerging from the back of the hall. No one noticed him, except Elias. He stopped a few feet away, giving the slightest nod. Confirmation. Respect. Then he disappeared back through the door, leaving Elias standing amidst the shifting tide he had created. The recess bell chimed, calling everyone back. Cassandra stood alone near the side wall, looking smaller than she ever had, stripped of the certainty she'd built her authority on. And Elias knew. This wasn't the end. This was the break. The part where the old narrative died and a new one began taking shape. Tomorrow, consequences would come. But today, exposure had landed exactly where it needed to. When the recess ended and residents filtered back into the hall, something fundamental had shifted. The tension was still present, but it no longer orbited Cassandra. It orbited the truth, circling it, absorbing it, preparing for the reckoning that would come next. Elias returned to his seat in the second row, steady and composed, the binder resting on his lap like a quiet promise. He didn't need to speak again. The evidence had already carved its place into every mind in the room. Miles Rennick stepped back to the podium, visibly more resolved than before. Whatever uncertainty he carried earlier had burned off in the heat of collective outrage. Let's resume, he said firmly. And let's be clear, today's goal is accountability. Cassandra stood near the side wall, arms folded tightly across her chest, jaw clenched. She looked like someone who had rehearsed a dozen defenses and found none of them usable now that the room refused to bend. Reese hovered behind her, smaller and quieter, the weight of the exposed violence pressing onto him. Miles began by addressing the footage again, acknowledging its authenticity and announcing a full independent review. But as murmurs began rising again, some angry, some demanding immediate consequence, Cassandra snapped. This isn't justice, she barked, stepping forward. This is a smear campaign orchestrated by a man who— Stop, Miles said sharply, turning toward her with a tone he had never used before. Enough. The room fell silent. Miles continued. A child was harmed. Evidence was hidden. You coached your son to lie. There's no justification for any of that. Cassandra stared at him, as if he'd betrayed her personally. I did what I had to do to protect the community. The community doesn't need protection from a 14-year-old girl, someone said loudly from the back. It needs protection from you. Voices rose again. Some called for resignation. Others demanded legal action. The tide had turned completely, and Cassandra was drowning beneath it. But then, unexpectedly, Reese stepped forward. His voice was barely above a whisper. Mom, stop. She spun toward him, shocked. Reese, don't you dare. Stop, he repeated, louder this time. I messed up. I hurt her. The room froze. Even Elias felt a pause ripple through him. Not forgiveness, not sympathy, but recognition. A shift. Reese continued, shaking as he spoke. I got angry and I took it out on her. She didn't do anything wrong. And when the dot showed up on my chest, I thought someone was going to shoot me. I panicked. But you, his voice cracked. You made it worse. A gasp traveled through the hall. Cassandra grabbed his arm. You don't understand what's happening. He pulled away. I understand enough. Dad left because of this. Because everything has to go your way. I'm done lying. His confession struck harder than any footage. Cassandra's face contorted. Rage, fear, humiliation, all tangled together. You ungrateful... Miles interrupted sharply. Cassandra, step back, now. She froze, realizing the authority she had wielded for years no longer belonged to her. Miles turned toward the residents. Given the overwhelming evidence, including a direct confession, we will begin formal proceedings to strip Cassandra Wells of her board position effective immediately. Cheers erupted. Relief too. Justice wasn't complete, but it had begun. Cassandra staggered back as if physically struck. She looked around the room, at the people whose compliance she once owned, and saw only condemnation. And then her gaze landed on Elias. For a moment, something dark tightened behind her eyes, an instinctive urge to retaliate. But there was nowhere left for her to swing, no narrative left to twist. Elias stood slowly, quiet, balanced, in control of himself, not her. You ruined everything, she whispered, voice trembling. Everything. No, Elias said evenly. You did. Miles moved toward the podium again. Meeting adjourned. The board will release official statements within 24 hours. And Mr. Vaughan, on behalf of the community, I'm sorry this happened under our watch. Elias nodded once. Make sure it never happens to anyone else. Residents stepped aside as he exited the aisle. People murmured thanks, apologies, support. Some placed gentle hands on his arm, but he didn't linger. His mind was already moving toward home, toward his daughter, who needed to know the truth had landed. Ken hurried after him. Elias, wait. Elias stopped. You need to know something, Ken said. When Cassandra realized the board was turning on her, she tried to access the server remotely. She wanted to delete your files, everything, but she couldn't. Because Elias had revoked her access hours earlier. I locked her out, Ken continued. I didn't tell her, and I won't. Elias placed a hand on his shoulder, a simple gesture of acknowledgement. Thank you. As he stepped outside, the afternoon sun warmed his face. For the first time in days, the light didn't feel harsh. It felt earned. Across the street, he spotted Oren leaning casually against a streetlight pole. He gave Elias a small nod, the kind that conveyed approval without words, then faded into the background of the neighborhood like he'd never been there at all. Elias started the walk home, binder secure, evidence preserved, the first real shift toward justice finally in motion. But he knew this wasn't the end. This was the part where the fallout began, and Cassandra, cornered, exposed, was far from done thrashing. He prepared himself for the next strike, because people like her never surrendered quietly. By the time Elias reached his street, the sun had dipped low, throwing long amber streaks across the pavement. The quiet felt different now, not heavy, not suffocating. It was the kind of silence that followed a storm breaking open. But even as he stepped toward his front door, a part of him remained alert. Cassandra had lost the room, lost the power, lost her manufactured control. But someone like her didn't collapse into stillness. She detonated. He unlocked the door and stepped inside. His daughter was awake on the couch, propped against cushions, watching him with wide, searching eyes. When she saw his expression, steady, centered, her shoulders relaxed. How did it go? She asked softly. He knelt beside her. The truth came out. People saw everything. Do they believe you now? They believe the evidence, he said, which is exactly how it should be. She nodded, relief mingling with exhaustion. He brushed a hand through her hair, careful not to disturb the bruises. You don't have to carry this alone anymore. She didn't respond with words. She just leaned forward, resting her forehead against his. A small, quiet moment. Fragile, precious. One he held gently before standing again. He checked the locks automatically. Old habits rarely faded. Then he set the binder on the kitchen table and poured himself a glass of water, letting the coolness settle him. His daughter drifted to sleep again, the calm returning to her features. A soft vibration buzzed in his jacket pocket. A text from Ken. She's furious. She stormed out of the hall. I think she's headed home. Just wanted to warn you. Elias read it twice, then typed a simple reply. Thank you. He didn't tense. He didn't pace. He simply acknowledged what he already anticipated. Cassandra wouldn't go quietly, not when her control had shattered publicly. He stepped to the window and scanned the street. For a long moment, nothing moved. Then a familiar figure emerged 3 houses down. Oren, arms folded, watching. Silent reassurance wrapped in shadow. Elias gave a small nod. Oren returned it. Minutes passed. The sky darkened. The first porch lights flickered on. Then headlights swept across the street as a car took the corner too fast, tires skidding slightly. Cassandra's vehicle. She slammed it to a stop in front of his house, engine still running, the glow of her dashboard lighting her furious silhouette. Elias opened the door halfway, but did not step outside. He didn't need to. Cassandra strode toward the porch, hair wild, eyes sharp with wounded pride. "You think this is over?" she hissed. "You think embarrassing me in front of those people makes you some kind of hero?" Her voice shook, not with vulnerability, but with rage at the loss of authority. Elias remained still, grounded. "This wasn't about you," he said. "It was about what your son did, and what you hid." "You humiliated me," she snapped. "You destroyed my reputation." "I exposed your actions," he corrected. "You destroyed your own reputation." She jabbed a finger toward him. "You don't belong here. Maintenance workers don't get to rewrite how this community functions." He didn't flinch. "This community isn't built on status. It's built on people, and you hurt one." She laughed, a bitter, brittle sound. "You think anyone will trust you after this? You think parents will let their kids anywhere near yours? You think your little show makes you safe?" Elias studied her carefully, not trembling, not shaken, just calculating what she might do next. "You should go home," he said, "before you make things worse for yourself." Her eyes narrowed. "You don't get to tell me what to do." And then she stepped forward, invading the last inches between them. "I will rebuild everything you tore down today. I will undo every lie you planted, and when this community chooses sides, you'll find yourself alone." Elias exhaled slowly. "I'm not the one people don't trust anymore." The words struck deeper than anything he could have shouted. Cassandra's jaw tightened, her breath hitched. From the street, a presence shifted. Oren stepping subtly into clearer view. Cassandra froze when she saw him. Recognition flashed across her face. The man who had filed the silent footage. The man whose rangefinder dot had broken her son's bravado. Oren didn't speak. He didn't need to. His eyes delivered the message she refused to hear. Her reach was over. Cassandra turned back to Elias. "You two think you've won," she spat. "But I don't break. I rebuild." "Then rebuild yourself," Elias said quietly. "Not your lies." Her face twisted with a fury she no longer had space to unleash. She backed away, steps uneven, pride unraveling. She climbed into her car and slammed the door so hard the frame rattled. She sped off into the night. Elias watched until her taillights vanished beyond the curve of the road. Only then did he step fully onto the porch, letting the night air cool what remained of the confrontation. Oren approached the sidewalk edge. "She won't stop here," he said. "I know," Elias replied. "But she can't control the narrative anymore," Oren added. "And that's what scares her." Elias nodded. "Truth usually does." Oren gave a small approving tilt of his head before walking off into the dark. Elias returned inside, locking the door with a sense of resolve. Tonight had been the backlash. Tomorrow would be the consequence, and he would be ready. The night after Cassandra's confrontation passed slowly, but not uneasily. Elias slept in the recliner beside his daughter, alert yet calm, listening to her breathing settle into a steady rhythm. Morning sunlight crept through the blinds, brushing across her face. The bruising looked lighter today. Healing had begun, not just for her, but for everything Cassandra had tried to distort. When she woke, she looked at him with a clarity he hadn't seen in days. "Did she come back?" she asked. "No," Elias said. "And she won't, not today." She nodded, reassured by his certainty. She didn't know the full breadth of Cassandra's desperation, nor did she need to. Children deserve the space to heal without carrying the weight of adult conflicts. He placed a gentle hand on her shoulder. Rest. I have a few things to take care of. By the time he stepped outside, the neighborhood felt different. People waved, some paused mid-walk, just to offer quiet words of support. Others simply nodded as if acknowledging a shift long overdue. Silverbrook Bluffs had been a polished machine for years, a machine maintained by compliance and Cassandra's grip. But the engine sputtered now, the shine was dulled, and it wasn't because of Elias. It was because the truth had finally been seen. At the HOA office, Miles greeted him with a solemn expression. "We need to talk," he said, motioning toward an empty conference room. Inside, a folder rested on the table. "We've suspended Cassandra pending investigation," Miles said. "But after reviewing everything, including the full server logs and the resident testimonies, we've decided on a recommendation." Elias waited. "We want you—" Miles paused, almost laughing at the irony. "To assume the interim role of community safety liaison." Elias raised a brow. Miles continued. "Not maintenance, not subordinate positions. This is advisory, oversight, review. Someone the board actually has to listen to. Someone with experience." Experience. The words settled between them. Simple, accurate, unspoken in its depth. Elias didn't flaunt his past, yet his decisions always bore the quiet discipline of someone trained to see angles others missed. "I'm not interested in titles," Elias said finally. "I only want accountability." "This is accountability," Miles replied. "Someone like you ensures it." Elias considered. He didn't crave power, but protection wasn't passive. It required placement. Eyes at the right level, hands with the right reach. Lyra deserved a safer community than the one that had failed her. "I'll accept," he said, "as long as transparency is non-negotiable." Miles looked relieved. "It is." As Elias left the building, messages buzzed on his phone. Ken had sent an update. Cassandra tried to access the backup servers again, this time from an external device. "She's scared and sloppy." "Don't worry, I blocked it." Elias typed back, "Thank you, this ends today." He headed home, stopping only briefly at the hardware store 2 blocks over. He wasn't preparing for conflict. He was preparing for closure. Before he returned, he noticed a familiar car turning onto his street. Cassandra's. She parked crookedly, her face hollowed by a sleepless night. Rage no longer fueled her. Panic did. She marched toward his porch, determination wobbling beneath the weight of her unraveling authority. Elias stepped outside before she could knock. "You won," she said, voice cracking under the strain. "Is that what you wanted?" "No," Elias replied. "I wanted the truth." "The truth destroyed my life," she spit back. "The truth revealed what you built," he said evenly. "And it wasn't a life, it was control." Her breath stuttered. "I was trying to protect my son. By teaching him to lie, by teaching him to hurt someone smaller, by erasing evidence." His tone remained calm, but the impact landed heavily. "That's not protection, that's corruption." Her shoulders sagged, an emotional collapse more damaging than any argument could have accomplished. "I don't know how to fix this." "You start," Elias said quietly, "by letting accountability do its work." Cassandra blinked as if someone had turned a mirror toward her for the first time. She stepped back, trembling. "They'll take everything." "Then rebuild something better," he said, echoing the same challenge she once threw at him, but reshaped now with meaning she couldn't twist. She didn't respond. She simply walked away, slowly, unsteadily, like someone facing the empty echo of all their choices. When her car disappeared down the road, Elias exhaled softly. Not victory. Resolution. Inside, his daughter sat up on the couch, watching him with quiet curiosity. "Is it over?" she asked. He stepped toward her and sat down. "Almost," he said. "Today just made space for everything to heal." She leaned against him, the moment soft and sincere. "I'm glad you didn't give up." He smiled gently. "I never will." Hours later, as the sun lowered, residents passed by with snacks, cards, small gestures of apology and support. One left flowers at the doorstep. Another dropped off groceries. Community, stubborn, imperfect, but present, showed itself. Ken arrived too, Laptop in hand, giving Elias the final confirmation. Cassandra had submitted her resignation, effective immediately. Elias stepped back, letting the breath he'd held for days finally disperse. His daughter smiled for the first time since the attack. Silverbrook Bluffs didn't look different, but it felt different, safer, honest. And for the first time since the world had twisted around them, the horizon looked wide again. Subscribe and don't miss our next story. Trust me, you'll feel it. And tell me in the comments, what injustice should we tackle next?